These are the unfair advantages of every curse technique in Jujutsu Kaisen. But instead of just listing them, I ranked every curse technique, and I even declared a king. And I'm pretty sure you're not going to guess which one it is. I'm going to start from the bottom, meaning they're only going to get more unfair the further we get into the video. Number 6. And honestly, this one is probably the most slept on technique in this entire video. Ratio technique. This belongs to Nanami Kento, a man who actually quit the Jujutsu world to become a regular salaryman, then came back because apparently corporate life was worse than fighting cursed spirits. Respect. The way it works is simple in concept. Nanami divides any object into 7 parts, and the point at 6 out of 7 always becomes a guaranteed weak point. Always. Concrete walls, human bone, cursed barriers, everything has that point. Now the unfair advantage here isn't the damage output, it's the certainty. Other techniques can be countered, dodged, or tanked, but you can't argue with geometry. Geometry doesn't care about your cursed energy output. What makes this even more interesting is that Nanami isn't naturally gifted in the way most sorcerers are. He's disciplined, calculated, and uses his technique with maximum efficiency. Ratio technique fits him perfectly. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, but it never fails. And in a world full of techniques with insane potential but highly situational uses, having something that works 100% of the time is an unfair advantage that most people completely overlook. That said, the drawbacks are pretty clear. This technique doesn't scale well against opponents who are significantly stronger. Nanami needs to physically reach that 6 out of 7 point with his weapon. Enemies who can teleport, enemies with domain expansions, or enemies without a definable physical form, the technique loses a lot of its effectiveness there. Reliable is great, but reliable without a high ceiling still has a ceiling. Number 5. And this one is fascinating because it's a technique that actually gets stronger the closer its user comes to death. Fushiguro Megumi inherited 10 shadows from the Zenin clan. It allows the user to summon up to 10 different Shikigami through shadows. Divine Dogs, Toad, Nue, Great Serpent, and the most infamous of all, Mahoraga. A Shikigami that in the entire history of this technique has never once been successfully tamed. Now the unfair advantage sits in one specific mechanic that most people tend to gloss over. In a duel between two 10 shadows users, if your Shikigami defeats the opponent's Shikigami, you can absorb its power. Think about what that means. This technique has built-in scaling. The more duels you win, the stronger your arsenal becomes. This isn't a technique that plateaus, it's a technique that grows from victory. And on top of that, 10 different Shikigami means you have an answer for almost every situation you'll ever find yourself in. The drawback though is just as brutal. Any Shikigami that dies is gone permanently. No respawning, no retraining. Every decision has a price, and that price is non-refundable. Megumi loses several throughout the series, and each loss directly cuts down his options. And Mahoraga, the strongest card in the deck, is a card that even its own user can't fully control. This is the most brutal resource management technique in the entire series. Number 4. And this one has a concept so simple it almost sounds made up. Inumaki Toge has a technique where he speaks and the world listens. Blast away, the enemy goes flying. Stop, the enemy stops moving. And in one specific incident that I still think about, Inumaki managed to stop a meteor falling from the sky using nothing but his voice. A meteor from the sky with his voice. The unfair advantage here is in the flexibility and a ceiling that is genuinely unclear. Nobody actually knows how strong cursed speech can become, because nobody has ever found the upper limit. And because it works through sound, the user doesn't need physical contact, doesn't need a specific range, and doesn't need precise line of sight. The price Inumaki pays though is one of the most brutal trade-offs on this entire list. Every time he uses cursed speech, his own body takes the damage too. The more powerful the command, the worse the damage. His throat bleeds, his voice deteriorates, and if he pushes past the limit, permanent. This is why Inumaki only communicates using rice ball fillings in everyday life. Salmon, tuna mayo. Not because he's quirky, but because every single word is a risk. Imagine having the most powerful ability in your voice, but every time you use it, you're hurting yourself. That's not a gift. That's a brutal trade-off. 2 more before I reveal the king. And this one is a little disturbing. Idle Transfiguration belongs to Mahito, and in terms of concept, this is the most broken technique in the entire series. Not because of its damage output, but because of what it can fundamentally do. This technique lets Mahito directly touch and reshape a person's soul, and because the body follows the shape of the soul, if the soul changes, the body changes. If the soul gets destroyed, that's it. The unfair advantage? There is technically no ceiling. Mahito can turn humans into weapons, create walking bombs, and transfigure his own body for defense or evasion. This isn't a technique with limited ammo. As long as there's a target and physical contact, it works. But here's what sets Idle Transfiguration apart from everything else on this list. This technique simply wouldn't work in just anyone's hands. Mahito can use this not just because he's powerful, but because he has a very specific philosophical understanding of what a soul actually is. That conviction is what makes the technique sharp. In the hands of someone uncertain about existence, this technique would be significantly weaker. The drawback comes down to one thing. It requires direct physical contact to activate, and in a world full of sorcerers with extraordinary speed and range, that's a window that can absolutely be exploited. One more before the king, and this is probably the most overlooked ability on this entire list. Reverse curse technique isn't a standalone technique. You don't inherit it exclusively like the others on this list, but it is an ability that, if mastered, immediately places you in a completely different tier from almost every other sorcerer alive, and almost nobody can actually do it. Here's the concept. Cursed energy is inherently negative, born from negative human emotions. Reverse curse technique flips it into positive energy by essentially multiplying two negatives into a positive, and that positive energy can be used to heal from the inside, regenerating organs, repairing damaged tissue, and even reviving cells that have already died. The unfair advantage is one simple but devastating fact. In a world where fighting is a daily reality, almost every sorcerer goes into battle with just one life. No self-healing. Every wound is permanent until they can rest or receive outside treatment. They are a glass that can crack, and once cracked, it stays cracked. Sorcerers who can use RCT though, they fight with a safety net that others don't even know how to build. Out of the entire JJK cast, the ones who can actually use this effectively can be counted on one hand. Gojo, Yuta, Shoko. Even plenty of high-grade sorcerers can't pull it off. The drawback is the energy cost. RCT consumes a massive amount of cursed energy. In the middle of an intense fight, allocating energy to healing can mean sacrificing offense or defense at the worst possible moment. And learning it in the first place, even for the most talented sorcerers, is an extremely difficult process with no guarantee of success. One more, and I'm pretty sure you already know what it is, but stick around, because the reason it's number one goes deeper than you'd think. Yeah, Limitless. I know, this isn't a surprise. But hear me out before you skip, because it's not just about how strong this technique is that makes it number one. It's about why this technique exists on a level that simply can't be compared to anything else. Limitless works by manipulating space at its most fundamental level, not space in the sense of distance, but space as a mathematical concept. The infinity that Gojo uses every single day, that's not a special technique he activates, that's his default state, a passive defense that is always on. Blue, the convergence of space into a single point. Red, the divergence of space into a massive expansion. Purple, the combination of both, which literally erases anything in its path from existence, not destroys, erases. The unfair advantage is this: there is no natural counter to this technique. To get through infinity, you need something that can conceptually touch the infinite, and that almost doesn't exist in the Jujutsu world. But here's the thing that most people don't actually talk about. Limitless without the 6 eyes is like having a supercar with a fuel tank that constantly leaks. Other members of the Gojo clan clan also inherit Limitless, but without the 6 eyes, the cursed energy consumption is so overwhelming that they simply cannot use this technique without burning out. This technique picks its own user, and the combination of Limitless and 6 eyes only appears once every few generations. Gojo Satoru isn't strong because he trained hard. He's strong because he's the only person in his entire generation who can use this technique without destroying himself in the process. The one reliable drawback? Domain expansion. Because a domain creates its own space that overrides reality, including infinity. That's the only door in that can actually be counted on, and even then, Gojo has an answer for it. So which technique is the most unfair? Let me know in the comments below, and if you have the time, turn on that notification bell. And remember, you don't choose your technique chooses you.